What did a young woman confess on her wedding night that melted the heart of a millionaire who had sworn never to love again? An arranged marriage, 24 years of age difference, and a secret that would change everything forever. Tell me, where are you watching from? If you want to discover how this revelation transformed both their lives, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This story will touch your heart. The Californian cotton sheets trembled under Emily's hands as she confessed, her voice filled with emotion and her eyes moist with sincere tears, that she had never known the caress of another man. Michael, the 45-year-old real estate magnate, accustomed to experienced women who sought him only for his wealth, felt something crumble in his armored chest when he saw the authentic vulnerability etched on the face of this 21-year-old Californian who had just become his wife. "We see clearly only with the heart," he murmured, surprised by his own words, as if a forgotten fragment of his soul had just awakened. This marriage, arranged by their families just 3 months earlier, was supposed to be just another transaction in his life of cold, calculated business. But in that moment, under the golden light of the chandeliers that bathed the presidential suite of the Ritz-Carlton in San Francisco, with the view of the bay glistening in the background, something changed forever. Emily trembled not only from nervousness, but from a deep fear of disappointing him. The 24-year age difference between them had always intimidated her, making her wonder if she would be able to meet the expectations of such an accomplished and experienced man. Raised in a traditional family in Napa Valley, where old values were still preserved with devotion in the White Houses of Sonoma, she had kept her intimacy as a precious treasure, waiting for someone who would truly value her. Her 3 most defining traits had always defined her: an authentic kindness that made her see the best in others, a silent determination that supported her even in the most difficult moments, and an artistic sensitivity inherited from generations of potters that allowed her to find beauty in details that others ignored. Now, facing this powerful and intimidating man from New York, with more than twice her age, she felt exposed and fragile as never before. Michael, for his part, carried the invisible scars of nearly 3 decades of failed relationships. Since his 20s, he had been used and discarded by women who loved only his Goldman Sachs account. His deepest inner conflict was his inability to trust sincere feelings, always looking for ulterior motives and hidden interests. This revelation from Emily, a girl who had just turned 21 a few months ago, had caught him completely off guard. He realized with troubling clarity that she had asked for nothing in exchange for this arranged marriage. No jewelry from Tiffany's, no additional apartments on Fifth Avenue, no unlimited credit cards. As the bay murmured its eternal song against the cliffs below, the 2 beings with such different pasts looked at each other truly for the first time. Between them opened an abyss of experiences, ages and worlds, but also an invisible bridge, woven from this mutual recognition that sometimes fate writes stories that reason does not understand. "I'm afraid," Emily confessed in a breath barely audible. Michael, surprising even his own hardened conscience, took her hand with a tenderness he thought he had long forgotten. "So am I," he replied simply. And so began their improbable story, suspended between 2 ages, 2 worlds, and 2 hearts that should never have met. In the first days following that transformative night, the Hamptons villa where they lived seemed to resonate with silences full of meaning. Emily, barely out of adolescence, rose early even before the staff to prepare his coffee with her own hands, seasoning each cup with Ceylon cinnamon and a pinch of brown sugar, in the traditional way her grandmother had taught her. She decorated the patio with red geraniums and white jasmine picked from the garden, creating simple but charming arrangements that contrasted with the cold sophistication of the minimalist environment. Michael, at 45, observed these youthful and pure gestures with a mixture of confusion and growing fascination. There was something refreshing in this youth, uncorrupted by cynicism. "Why do you do all this yourself?" he asked one morning, as the Californian sun was just beginning to caress the century-old olive trees in the garden. "We have staff to take care of these things." Emily looked up from the porcelain cup she was preparing with such care, her eyes reflecting a wisdom surprising for someone so young. "Because beauty exists only in gestures made with love," she replied simply. "My mother always told me that it's not wealth that creates a home, but the intentions that inhabit each small daily ritual." Michael remained silent, struck by the depth of this reflection coming from someone so young. In his world of transactions and market value, where everything could be bought and replaced, this philosophy seemed almost from another time. The days passed, and Emily began to explore this new territory that was her married life. She discovered with childlike curiosity the contemporary artworks that adorned the walls, asking questions about their creators, their meanings, listening attentively to Michael's explanations. Unlike his previous conquests, she didn't pretend to know or appreciate these things to impress him. Her honesty was disarming. During a dinner, she made the mistake of confusing a Warhol with a Basquiat, provoking the condescending laugh of one of Michael's associates. Instead of feeling humiliated, she smiled and asked for the difference to be explained, transforming what could have been a moment of embarrassment into an opportunity for learning. Michael, accustomed to women masking their ignorance behind sophisticated airs, was touched by this authenticity. "You don't need to pretend with me," he told her later that night, as they stood side by side on the terrace, contemplating the sea glistening under the moon. "I don't know how to do otherwise," she replied, turning toward him, her face bathed in silver light. "I haven't yet learned to be someone else." This phrase, uttered without artifice, pierced something deep in Michael. At 45, after decades of navigating a world where authenticity was a weakness, he found himself facing a mirror that showed him all he had lost along the way. Yet these first days were not without challenges. Emily sometimes felt crushed by the weight of invisible expectations. The staff, all older than her, observed her with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. The chef, a 50-year-old man who came directly from a starred restaurant in Manhattan, had difficulty hiding his disdain when she asked him to prepare simple dishes from her Californian childhood, rather than the elaborate gastronomic creations of which he was proud. "She still plays with dolls," she heard him mutter one day to the housekeeper, provoking stifled laughter in the kitchens. These little wounds she kept to herself, not wanting to appear capricious or complaining in her husband's eyes. She instinctively understood that in this new world she would have to prove her worth not through demands, but through quiet grace. Michael, despite his new sensitivity toward his young wife, was often absent, caught in the whirlwind of his New York affairs. Emily spent long hours alone, exploring the property, reading books in the impressive library, or sketching pottery designs in a notebook she kept hidden like a secret link to her former life. One afternoon, as she was drawing while sitting near the pool, Michael returned earlier than expected. He observed her in silence for a moment, struck by the intense concentration that animated her young face. Approaching slowly, he glanced at the notebook and was seized by the beauty and complexity of the patterns she was creating. "That's extraordinary," he said, genuinely impressed. Emily started, instinctively closing the notebook as if caught in the act. "It's nothing," she murmured, "just memories of the family pottery." Michael gently took the notebook from her hands and reopened it, carefully examining the drawings. "You have a real talent," he said. "Why do you hide it?" She shrugged, suddenly vulnerable. I thought these things didn't have a place here, in our world." Michael felt a dull pain at these words. What had he done to give her this impression? What golden prison was he creating for this young woman? "Emily," he said softly, "I didn't marry you for you to become someone else. I married you. For you." The words came out spontaneously, and he realized with sudden clarity that they contained a truth he was only beginning to understand himself. The transformation would not be simple. Michael's ex-fiancée, Sarah, a 40-year-old Manhattan socialite accustomed to getting everything she desired, discovered the marriage and appeared at the villa during an important dinner with Belgian and Swiss investors. Dressed in a provocative Chanel dress and wearing an intoxicating perfume of orange blossom and amber, she took care to recall intimate moments from the past in New York, observing with cruel satisfaction how Emily, so young and inexperienced, paled at each word pronounced in rapid English. "Michael, darling," purred Sarah, kissing both of Michael's cheeks with excessive familiarity. "How aren't expected to see you playing Daddy." The investors exchanged uncomfortable glances, while Emily, seated at the end of the table, felt the mocking gaze of this sophisticated woman undress and judge her. "I always knew you had a weakness for youth," continued Sarah, negligently sipping the champagne she had served herself. "But to marry a child, it's almost touching." Michael, frozen by the surprise of this intrusion, finally found his voice. "Sarah, this is neither the time nor the place." "Oh, don't worry," she interrupted him with a crystalline laugh that barely masked her bitterness. "I won't spoil your little party. I just came to see for myself this marvel who made you give up our arrangement so quickly." She turned to Emily with a venomous smile. "You must have very special talents, my little one." "Talents, I would be curious to know." The woman laughed cynically, commenting that this child could never satisfy the needs of a man like Michael. He, however, surprised everyone by standing up, taking his wife's hand with unexpected tenderness and asking in a firm tone for the intruder to leave the premises immediately. "You no longer have a place in my life, Sarah," he said in a low but firm voice. "And you certainly don't have the right to speak to my wife like that." Sarah's face hardened, all pretense of amusement gone. "Your wife?" she spat. "This provincial girl playing the grand lady? Don't make me laugh, Michael. We both know what she really represents. A new toy, a distraction. How long before you get bored? 6 months? A year?" Michael felt Emily's hand tremble slightly in his, but when he looked down at her he was surprised to see not tears, but a calm dignity that seemed well beyond her 21 years. "Ma'am," said Emily in a soft but clear voice, speaking for the first time, "I understand your anger. Lost love is always painful, but insulting Michael won't bring him back to you." A stunned silence fell over the room. Sarah, accustomed to provoking hysterical crises in her rivals, was momentarily speechless in the face of this measured response. Michael, taking advantage of this moment, signaled to security. 2 discreet but efficient men immediately appeared. "Escort Madam to her car," he ordered. Then, turning to the investors, "Gentlemen, please excuse me for this regrettable interruption. I suggest we continue our discussion in the private lounge." As Sarah was firmly but respectfully led to the exit, she cast a last venomous look at Emily. "He'll tire of you, little one. They always do. And when he does, what will be left for you? A youth wasted on a man who collects women like trophies." That evening marked a turning point. Emily, despite her 21 years, instead of reproaches or dramatic jealousy, simply squeezed his hand in return and murmured that she understood that everyone carries a past. The emotional maturity of this response, coming from someone so young, left Michael stunned. Later that night, when the villa was finally silent, Michael found Emily on the terrace, contemplating the sea in her crumpled evening dress, looking lost in thought. "I'm sorry for what happened," he said, approaching her. "Sarah is too complicated." Emily turned to him, her young face grave in the half-light. "Was she important to you?" she asked simply. Michael hesitated, then decided that truth was the only possible path between them. "She was part of my life, yes. We had an arrangement like many in my circle. Not really love, more of a practical association." "And us?" The question was so direct, so devoid of the usual games Michael was accustomed to, that he felt his heart tighten. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "What we have, it's different from anything I've known." Emily nodded slowly, accepting this incomplete answer. She turned her gaze to the horizon, where the sea and sky merged into a single darkness dotted with stars. "I'm 21, Michael," she said softly. "I don't know much about the world or relationships, but I know that I don't want to be an arrangement. I would rather be alone than be a temporary toy or a trophy in someone's collection." He realized that he was dealing with someone profoundly different from all the women he had known during his decades, in the exclusive clubs of Manhattan and the Hamptons parties. This young woman, with her disarming sincerity and her refusal to play power games, confronted him with a truth he had long avoided, the emptiness of his own emotional existence. "I can't promise I'll know how to do this," he said finally. "I've spent so many years protecting myself that I'm no longer sure I know what a real connection is, but I can promise to try, if you're patient with me." Emily turned to him, and in the silver moonlight he saw a smile that illuminated something long extinguished within him. "We'll learn together," she said, taking his hand. "You to trust, me to grow. Maybe that's the real balance between us." The following months brought a series of revelations that tested their relationship in unexpected ways. Emily's best friend Jessica, a young woman of the same age motivated by jealousy at not having made an equally advantageous marriage, began to sow seeds of doubt, whispering during walks in Central Park that Michael could never truly love her. that the age difference between them was too great, that he kept her only as a young trophy in his collection of conquests. "Don't you see how he looks at you in public?" whispered Jessica one day, as they were having tea in a fashionable Manhattan cafe. "Like you're a possession, not a partner." Emily frowned, gently setting down her porcelain cup. "That's not true. Michael respects me." Jessica gave a small, condescending laugh. "My dear, men of his age and position don't respect young women like us. They desire us, exhibit us, then replace us. It's the natural cycle of these relationships." "Our relationship isn't like that," protested Emily, although her heart tightened slightly. "Really?" Jessica leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Then why does he still keep that photo of Sarah in his office? Why does he still regularly dine with her to discuss business? You're so naive, Emily." These words, although Emily tried to ignore them, began to infiltrate her consciousness like a slow poison. She now observed Michael with a different gaze, looking for signs of weariness or regret in his expressions. Each time he looked at his phone and smiled, she wondered if he was corresponding with other women. Each time he mentioned a business dinner, she imagined Sarah or other former lovers sitting at his side. Emily, initially shaken, struggled against her own fear of not having enough experience for such a worldly and experienced man. She began to feel inadequate in this sophisticated world of Manhattan high society. Her attempts to adapt, dressing according to the latest trends, familiarizing herself with wines and gastronomy, learning the subtle codes of the American elite, always seemed inadequate. One evening during a reception at the British Embassy, Emily made a mistake by confusing a foreign dignitary with the waiter, provoking stifled laughter among some guests. Michael, far from being embarrassed, defended her warmly, but the incident left Emily humiliated and more convinced than ever that she didn't belong in this world. "I'm sorry for putting you in an awkward position," she murmured in the car on the way back, as the lights of New York passed like shooting stars through the tinted window. Michael took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "You don't have to be sorry. These people have been in my life for decades, and yet I've never felt with them the connection I feel with you. But I don't know how to behave in your world," she admitted, with tears shining in her eyes. "I don't know the rules, the stories, the jokes. I feel like an imposter." "My world," repeated Michael, shaking his head slightly. "I've spent 25 years in this world, and do you know what I've found there? Superficial relationships, conditional friendships, smiles that hide knives. It's not a world you need to adapt to, Emily. It's a world that doesn't deserve your authenticity." These words, spoken with evident sincerity, brought some comfort to Emily. However, the seeds of doubt had been sown, and they continued to germinate despite her efforts to ignore them. Michael, for his part, faced pressures from his Manhattan social circle. Business associates of his age insinuated that this marriage to a kid from California was damaging his sophisticated image, making him appear as a mature man desperately trying to regain his youth. "Do you know what they're saying about you in the boardrooms?" James, his oldest associate, asked him one day as they shared a glass of scotch at the Plaza Hotel. "That you're going through a particularly acute midlife crisis. That you've lost your judgment." Michael observed the amber reflections in his glass, a slight smile on his lips. "And since when do I care what they say?" James leaned forward, his face suddenly grave. "Since it affects our business, Michael. The Germans are hesitating on the Berlin deal. They say they're not sure about your current stability." Michael felt a cold anger rising in him. "My stability? Understand me well," continued James, uncomfortable but determined. "No one questions your business genius, but this sudden marriage with a girl young enough to be your daughter, it projects an image of impulsivity, irrationality, qualities our partners don't much appreciate." "Emily is not an impulse," replied Michael, his voice dangerously low, "and my marriage is not negotiable." James sighed, setting down his glass. "No one's asking you to divorce, my friend. Simply to be more discreet. Keep your young wife at home, or on vacation in the Hamptons. Don't bring her to important meetings. Don't let people think she influences your decisions." During a charity gala at the New York Plaza, where the air was perfumed with champagne and expensive fragrances, he heard malicious comments about his wife being too young to belong to this world of luxury brands and private jets. The anger he felt was visceral and revealing, He was protecting not only his wife, but something he was beginning to recognize as true love. That evening, returning to their suite at the plaza, Michael found Emily asleep on the couch, a book of American poetry open on her chest, her study notes scattered around her. He realized with a pang in his heart that she was working hard to integrate into his world, while that same world cruelly rejected her. Sitting softly beside her, he caressed her hair, waking Emily, who smiled at him with that simple tenderness that had begun to heal something deeply broken within him. "Good evening," she asked, her voice still clouded with sleep. Michael hesitated, then decided to share a bit of his truth. "I realized something tonight," he said. "I've spent my life trying to earn the respect of people I don't even like." Emily sat up, suddenly more alert. "And now?" "Now," he said, taking her hand, "I wonder if everything I've built is really worth it." The situation became complicated when his family organized a formal presentation dinner at their property in the Connecticut countryside. Michael's mother, Victoria Reed, a rigid matriarch of 70 years accustomed to controlling every aspect of her son's life, had personally chosen another candidate to be his daughter-in-law, a 38-year-old Boston heiress of impeccable lineage and educated at Oxford. The Reed family mansion, an elegant 18th-century manor house nestled in a private park not far from Greenwich, imposed with its austere grandeur. Emily, dressed in a midnight blue dress specially chosen for the occasion, felt her stomach knot as they crossed the wrought-iron gates. "Your mother will hate me," she murmured to Michael, as their car drove up the white gravel driveway lined with century-old lime trees. Michael squeezed her hand. "My mother doesn't like anyone who threatens her control. Don't take it personally." "Is that supposed to reassure me?" she asked with a nervous smile. He smiled back, but Emily could see the tension in his eyes. This meeting was important even if he pretended otherwise. Victoria Reed awaited them in the grand salon, straight and imperial in her grey silk dress, her silver hair styled in an impeccable bun. Her eyes, the same icy blue as her son's, evaluated Emily from head to toe with clinical precision. "So this is her," she finally said, addressing Michael as if Emily were not present. "She is young." "Mother," replied Michael, his voice suddenly formal, "I present to you Emily, my wife. Emily, my mother, Victoria Reed." Emily stepped forward, offering her hand with a smile she hoped was charming. "I'm delighted to meet you, Mrs. Reed. Michael has told me a lot about you." Victoria took her hand briefly as if the contact was unpleasant. "Really, he's been surprisingly silent about you until this surprise." Dinner was served in the formal dining room, where generations of Reeds had maintained their alliances and influence. The Wedgwood china gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, the silver cutlery sparkled, and the crystal glasses rang delicately when touched. Around the table, besides Michael and Emily, were Michael's older sister, Margaret, her banker husband, and, to Michael's surprise, Catherine Thompson, the Boston heiress his mother had initially chosen for him. During dinner, the matriarch took care to subtly humiliate Emily, commenting that, at 21, she is still practically a child, criticizing everything from her table manners to her lack of knowledge about Napa Valley and Sonoma wines. "So, my dear," asked Victoria during the fish course, "what education have you received? Michael has been so discreet about your background." Emily set down her fork, aware that every pair of eyes around the table was fixed on her. "I studied at Stanford University, Mrs. Reed. I graduated with honors, and I had begun art history studies before our marriage." "Art history," repeated Victoria with a cold smile. "How decorative. And your family? What exactly does your father do? Michael mentioned something about crafts." The condescending tone was impossible to miss. Emily felt her cheeks flush slightly, but kept her composure. "My father runs the family pottery studio in Sonoma, Mom. We've been creating traditional California ceramics for 5 generations. Souvenirs for tourists, essentially," intervened Catherine with a honeyed smile. "I bought some during my last stay in Napa Valley. Little colored grasshoppers, isn't that adorable?" Emily gritted her teeth but maintained her smile. "Our studio primarily produces functional and artistic pieces for collectors and museums, Miss Thompson. Souvenirs represent only a small part of our activity." Of course," Catherine nodded with a condescending wave of her hand. "I'm sure it's charming." "Speaking of art," intervened Victoria, Catherine has just donated a significant part of her personal collection to the MoMA. The Minister of Culture was present at the ceremony, wasn't he, my dear? A small gesture, Catherine modestly replied. My grandfather had a remarkable eye for impressionists before they became fashionable. The meal continued in this vein, each comment, each anecdote carefully designed to highlight Emily's inadequacy and Catherine's perfect compatibility with the Reed world. Michael, witnessing the silent humiliation in his young wife's eyes, felt a growing anger rising within him. "And tell me, Emily," Victoria finally asked as dessert was being served, "do you plan to give heirs to the Reed family soon? At your age, I imagine that's the main contribution you can make." An icy silence fell over the table. Michael abruptly set down his spoon, the sound resonating like a gunshot in the tense room. Michael made a decision he would never have imagined himself capable of making. He publicly confronted his own mother, declaring that his wife, regardless of her age, was worth more than all the lineage and formal education in the world. "That's enough, Mother," he said in a cutting voice that surprised even his usually impassive older sister. "I will not allow you to speak to my wife in that tone, nor to organize this grotesque spectacle." He gestured toward Catherine, who at least had the decency to appear embarrassed. "Michael!" exclaimed Victoria, placing a hand on her chest as if she had just been physically attacked. "I'm only asking legitimate questions. This girl, this woman," he corrected her firmly, "is my wife, and contrary to what you seem to think, she was not chosen for her pedigree or her connections, but for her kindness, her authenticity, and her strength of character. Qualities I find remarkably absent around this table tonight." Margaret emitted a small nervous laugh, while her husband concentrated intently on his wine glass. Catherine, finally understanding the situation, displayed a dignified, offended expression. "You can't be serious," said Victoria, her voice now trembling with indignation. This mesalliance will ruin the reputation our family has taken generations to build." Michael stood up, silently inviting Emily to do the same. "If our family name depends on rejecting people based on their origin or age, then perhaps it deserves to be ruined." He took Emily's hand and headed for the exit. At the threshold of the room, he stopped and turned around. "Oh, and Mother, if you wish to continue being part of my life, and that of your future grandchildren, I suggest you reconsider your attitude toward the woman I've chosen." This courageous defense created a painful but necessary break in the family. In the car that took them back to Manhattan, Emily remained silent for a long time, watching the city lights gradually appear on the horizon. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. Michael gave her a surprised look. "Sorry? For what?" "For being the cause of this break with your family." She turned to him, tears in her eyes. "I don't want to be the one who separates you from your own." He took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not the cause, Emily. My mother and her need for control are. I should have taken this stand years ago." Emily, moved but concerned, confessed that she didn't want to be the cause of a family division. She questioned, with tears in her eyes, whether he might one day regret having chosen someone so young and inexperienced. "What if she was right?" she murmured. "What if you wake up one day regretting having married someone like me rather than a woman like Catherine?" It was then that Michael realized the depth of his love. This 21-year-old girl was ready to give up her own happiness to preserve his peace. This potential sacrifice struck him like a lightning bolt of awareness. "Emily," he said, taking her face in his hands, "I've spent 25 years surrounded by women like Catherine, calculating, cold, interested, and I've never been so alone. You're the first person who sees me truly, not my name, not my fortune, not my power. How could I ever regret that?" He finally understood that true love was not a matter of explosive passion or calculated convenience, but of someone ready to put his well-being above their own, regardless of the age difference. The following months brought a relative calm. Michael and Emily found a common rhythm, creating together a life that borrowed as much from Michael's sophisticated world as from Emily's authentic simplicity. They spent weekends in a small Sonoma cottage that Michael had bought near Emily's native village, far from critical gazes and social expectations. There, among the vineyards, and under the starry Californian skies, they discovered aspects of themselves long ignored or forgotten. Michael, far from the tailored suits and endless meetings, rediscovered the simple pleasure of working with his hands, patiently restoring old oak beams or pruning olive trees under the instructions of Emily's father. She, for her part, began to find her voice in their Manhattan life, gradually transforming their Fifth Avenue apartment into a warmer space that reflected their union of styles and eras. But the business world, like nature, never remains peaceful for long. One September morning, as the leaves of the Manhattan maples were just beginning to turn gold, Michael received a call that would shake the very foundations of his empire. "Mr. Reed," his legal director gravely announced, "there's a problem with the Berlin acquisition. The German authorities have opened an investigation for financial irregularities." This simple phrase triggered an avalanche of events that would test their relationship as never before. Rumors began to circulate in Manhattan financial circles, suggesting that Michael had falsified documents to obtain construction permits in the German capital. Although these accusations were unfounded, the result of a plot orchestrated by a jealous competitor, they were enough to shake investor confidence and cause his real estate group's stock to fall by nearly 30% in a week. Michael, accustomed to navigating the troubled waters of international business, faced this storm with apparent calm. But Emily, who had learned to read the subtle signs of his stress, the tension in his jaw, the way he unconsciously rubbed his wedding ring, could see well that this crisis was eating him from within. A financial scandal in Michael's company threatened not only his fortune built over 25 years of hard work, but also his reputation in the American real estate market. Dubious investors and treacherous associates began to distance themselves, leaving him vulnerable as never before. "It's just a temporary setback," he assured Emily each evening, as they dined late in their dining room, now often empty of the business guests who used to crowd it. "We've been through worse." But days passed, then weeks, and the situation only worsened. Banks began to recall their loans, longtime partners withdrew from crucial projects, and even James, his oldest associate, suggested that perhaps it was time for Michael to step back for the good of the company. It was during a particularly tense dinner at James's home that the breaking point was reached. Gathered around a table where the atmosphere was as cold as the champagne, the main shareholders of the Reed Group openly discussed the future of the company as if Michael were not present. "We must consider a complete restructuring," declared James, carefully avoiding the gaze of his old friend. "Perhaps a new direction, fresh blood." "Fresh blood," repeated Michael, his voice dangerously calm. "After 25 years of building this company with my own hands?" James at least had the decency to appear uncomfortable. "It's temporary, of course. Just until things calm down, until this situation in Berlin is resolved." "This situation, as you call it," replied Michael, "is a complete fabrication, and you know it perfectly well." An uncomfortable silence fell around the table. Emily, seated beside Michael, observed these men and women in expensive suits, these people who had called themselves his friends for decades, now ready to abandon him at the first sign of difficulty. She felt an anger rising in her, not for herself, but for Michael. "May I say something?" she suddenly asked, surprising everyone, including her husband. James cast a condescending look in her direction. "My dear, this is a rather complex business discussion." "I understand perfectly what's happening here," she interrupted him, her voice soft but firm. "You're abandoning a man who has created value for all of you for years at the first sign of difficulty. Is this how business works in New York, or is it simply cowardice?" A scandalized murmur ran around the table. Michael placed a hand on hers, as if to moderate her, but she gently withdrew it. "Emily," he began, but she was already shaking her head. "No, Michael, these people need to hear this." She turned to James. "Sir, my husband built this company with integrity and vision. He has weathered 3 economic recessions, 2 real estate crises, and has always emerged stronger. Do you really think this fabricated accusation will be what defeats him?" Her gaze slowly traveled around the table, meeting the eyes of each person present. "If you abandon him now, you don't deserve to share in his success when he overcomes this trial. And he will overcome it, with or without you." A stunned silence followed her words. Michael looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration, discovering yet another new facet of this young woman he thought he knew. On the way back, In the silent car that took them to their Manhattan apartment, Michael finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "But thank you." Emily turned to him with a determined face. "I know how to recognize injustice when I see it. These people owe you everything, and at the first difficulty, they treat you like a pariah." Michael smiled weakly. "Welcome to the business world, my dear. Loyalty lasts exactly as long as prosperity." "Then it's not a world I accept," she replied firmly. "And neither should you." That night, as they lay side by side in their bed, contemplating the lights of Manhattan twinkling through the windows, Michael shared his deepest fears. "What if they were right?" he murmured. "What if I've lost my instinct? 25 years of work, everything could disappear in a few weeks." Emily turned to him, gently tracing the contours of his face in the darkness. "Then we'll start over. Together. It's not your company that defines who you are, Michael." At 45, he emitted a joyless laugh. "Starting over from scratch?" "Why not?" she replied simply. "You have the experience, the knowledge, the contacts, but more important, you have something many of these people will never have." "And what's that?" "Someone who believes in you," she said, placing her hand on his heart. Unconditionally. In this dark period when even friends of several decades disappeared, Emily, with her youth and renovative energy, proved to be an unexpected force. She not only stayed by his side, but used her artistic creativity inherited from Californian potters and her fresh perspective of someone not yet corrupted by corporate cynicism to help him rethink his business strategies. For 6 months of intense struggle, the couple worked side by side, combining his decades of experience with her innovative outlook. Emily suggested reorienting part of the business toward projects to restore historic buildings in cities like Boston and Philadelphia, preserving the cultural heritage while creating dignified housing for communities in need. "It's a beautiful idea, Emily, but completely unrealistic from a commercial standpoint," Michael had initially responded, distractedly leafing through the dossier she had prepared with such care. "Heritage restoration is a bottomless pit. The margins are minimal, the administrative complications innumerable." Emily hadn't given in, pushing the dossier back toward him. "Look at the numbers, Michael. Really look at them." Reluctantly, he had examined more carefully the financial projections she had developed with the help of a young economist from Harvard, a childhood friend who still believed in idealism. "These estimates are based on what exactly?" he asked, frowning at margins that actually seemed more promising than he would have believed. "On the fact that the government tripled tax credits for heritage restoration last year," she explained patiently. "And on the fact that 3 European foundations are desperately looking for private partners for urban revitalization projects. I've already spoken with their representatives." Michael looked up, surprised. "You contacted European foundations? When?" "While you were fighting with lawyers and banks," she replied with a small shrug. "I couldn't sit around doing nothing." This initiative, which initially seemed naive coming from a 21-year-old woman with no experience in real estate, revealed a strategic intelligence that Michael had not anticipated. Emily had identified an opportunity that his experienced advisors had completely overlooked, a niche where Reed's tarnished image could become an asset rather than a handicap. A company in difficulty that chooses to reinvent itself by preserving heritage and serving communities, she explained during an improvised presentation in their living room. "It's a redemption story that the media will love, that politicians will want to support, and that will attract a completely different type of investor." Michael watched her with wonder, realizing that behind the youth and gentleness hid a formidable strategic intelligence. The age difference that had seemed so important in the world's eyes now faded in the face of this evidence. They complemented each other perfectly, his experience and pragmatism balancing her freshness and idealism. The first project was launched in Boston, the restoration of an old 19th-century textile mill into a complex combining social housing, cultural spaces, and workshops for artisans. Michael had initially doubted that the funding would materialize, but Emily's passion and the sincerity of their vision attracted not only the European foundations she had contacted, but also a new type of investor, younger, more concerned with social impact. "I can't believe we've exceeded the funding target," Michael admitted one evening as they celebrated with a bottle of champagne on the terrace of their Manhattan apartment. "You were right from the beginning," Emily smiled. her face illuminated by the golden light of the setting sun over the Hudson. "We were right. It's your experience that made this project viable. I could never have navigated the regulatory complexities without you." Michael took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Do you know what fascinates me most about you, Emily? It's not your youth or even your beauty. It's your ability to see the possibility of goodness in a world I considered fundamentally cynical. It's not idealism," she gently corrected. "It's clairvoyance. The world is changing, Michael. People want companies that do more than generate profits. They want companies that contribute positively to society." The touch of humanity and Emily's generational vision attracted new ethical investors and opened previously inaccessible markets. The Boston project was followed by similar initiatives in Philadelphia, then in Chicago, each success strengthening not only the financial health of the Reed Group, but also its reputation. The media, which had delighted in his fall a few months earlier, now told the fascinating story of this unexpected renaissance. A prestigious business magazine even published a portrait of the couple headlined, "Age and Youth, the Unlikely Duo Revolutionizing American Real Estate." The article, rather than mocking their age difference, presented it as a strength, the wisdom of experience combined with the energy of youth. Some of the associates who had abandoned Michael began to reappear, offering their support and congratulations as if they had never doubted him. James himself requested a meeting, proposing to reinvest in the group's new projects. "What did you tell him?" Emily asked after this meeting, noting Michael's thoughtful expression. "I told him that our new direction privileges partners who share our values, not just our appetite for profit," he replied, a slight smile on his lips. He seemed perplexed. Emily laughed, snuggling against him. "You're becoming an idealist, Michael Reed. Be careful, it's contagious." "Maybe it's exactly what I needed," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "Someone to remind me why we work, beyond the accumulation of wealth." But despite these professional successes, something was beginning to change in Emily. Michael sometimes caught her looking out the window with a melancholic expression, or leafing through photo albums of her native village with obvious nostalgia. She had devoted so much energy to helping him rebuild his empire, to adapting to his world, that she seemed to have temporarily set aside her own dreams and aspirations. This realization troubled Michael, who was beginning to wonder if, in his gratitude for her support, he hadn't inadvertently encouraged Emily to give up too much of herself. The final turning point came during a night of Santa Ana winds, when Michael found his wife in the Sonoma-style living room of the villa, crying silently as she read old letters from her family in California. They had spent the last few months in a whirlwind of activity, project inaugurations, meetings with investors, press conferences. The Reed Group was not only saved, but transformed, becoming a model of a company combining profitability and social responsibility. Michael was celebrated as a visionary, invited to share his new philosophy at universities and international economic forums. Emily accompanied him to these events, always by his side, always smiling and engaging. But that evening, in the intimacy of their Hamptons villa, the mask had fallen. "Emily?" Michael murmured, approaching gently. "What's wrong?" She started slightly, quickly wiping away her tears with the back of her hand, like a child caught in the act. "Nothing. I'm just nostalgic, I suppose." Michael sat beside her, noticing the handwritten letters on her knees, her mother's neat writing, the clumsy drawings of her young cousins in the margins. "You miss them," he said softly. It wasn't a question. Emily nodded, a new tear escaping despite her efforts. "And they miss me. It's stupid, isn't it? After all we've accomplished together, all this success, I'm crying over letters like a little girl." Michael took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's not stupid. It's human." She gave him a grateful look, then turned her eyes toward the window where the ocean roared under the effect of the Santa Ana, the waves crashing against the rocks in a spectacle of primitive force. She confessed that at 21 she felt lost between two worlds, too young for Michael's social circle, but too distant from her roots. She missed the simplicity of her previous life, the smell of fresh pastries in the Mission District of San Francisco, the sound of jazz in the old clubs of North Beach at twilight, the honest conversations in the family home among lemon trees and bougainvilleas with friends her own age. "I love our life, Michael, really," she said. her voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "I'm proud of what we've built together. But sometimes I wake up and don't recognize myself in the mirror anymore." Michael felt his heart tighten. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm playing a role. The perfect wife, the business partner, the sophisticated young woman who can hold a conversation about Napa Valley wines or real estate market trends." She turned to him, her eyes bright with tears. "But deep down, I'm still the girl who prefers bare feet in clay, who sings Californian songs while working, who dreams of creating things with her hands rather than restructuring empires." This confession touched Michael to the heart. He realized that in their struggle to save his world, they had perhaps neglected hers. "I've stolen your youth," he murmured, horrified by this sudden realization. Emily vigorously shook her head, taking his face in her hands. "No, Michael. I made my choices. I chose you and our life together. It's just that maybe we need to find a better balance." She feared that in trying to adapt so early to Michael's world, she was losing essential parts of herself and her youth. Michael, instead of minimizing her feelings, did something he had never done for anyone in his 45 years of life. He bought a restored ranch in Napa Valley, where they would spend weekends reconnecting with that simplicity that sustained her so much. "I don't want you to abandon your company or our life in New York," Emily specified. "I'm so proud of what we've accomplished. I just want to find a bit of myself along the way." Michael remained silent for a long time, reflecting deeply. Then, in a gesture that surprised Emily, he stood up and held out his hand to her. "Come with me," he said. He led her to his study, where he unlocked a secure drawer and took out a stack of documents. "I was going to surprise you with this next week, for our anniversary, but perhaps this is the ideal moment." Intrigued, Emily took the papers he handed her. They were property deeds and architectural plans for a magnificent California ranch, located just a few miles from the village where she had grown up. You bought a house in Napa Valley?" she asked, astonished. Michael nodded, an uncertain smile on his lips. "Not just a house. There's also an old pottery studio on the property. The previous owners abandoned it a decade ago, but the equipment is still there. I thought you might want to restore it. Work there. Create again." Emily stared at the documents, incredulous. "But New York? The company?" "We can share our time," he explained. "New York is just a few hours by plane. The company is stable now. I have a team I trust. We could spend 3 days a week here, 4 days there." He took her hands in his. "I don't want you to have to choose between your world and mine, Emily. I want us to build our own world, one that honors both." This gesture of understanding and adaptation broke the last barriers between them. Emily threw herself into his arms, mixing tears and laughter in an emotional explosion that swept away months of unexpressed tension. "When can we see it?" she asked, her face radiant with a joy Michael hadn't seen in a long time. "Tomorrow, if you want," he replied, laughing. "The Santa Ana will have calmed down, and I don't have meetings that can't be postponed." That night, as the wind howled around the villa as if to purge the old and make way for the new, they stayed up late, talking as they hadn't in months. Michael spoke of his lonely childhood in the big house in Connecticut, his mother's crushing expectations, his aborted rebellion when he had wanted to become an architect rather than a businessman. Emily shared her youthful dreams, traveling, creating a line of contemporary ceramics inspired by Californian traditions, perhaps even teaching one day. For the first time in a long time, they were talking not as a 45-year-old businessman and his young wife, but as two souls sharing their deepest hopes, their most intimate fears, their most authentic dreams. The purchase of the Napa Valley Ranch and the discovery of the pottery studio had infused new energy into their relationship. Emily spent her days restoring the old studio, cleaning the century-old kiln, ordering clay and glazes, sketching designs for her first creations. Michael, when not in video conference with his New York teams, found himself appreciating the manual work of renovation, sanding old beams, restoring dry stone walls, planting aromatic herbs in the garden. This new dynamic seemed ideal, a perfect balance between their two worlds, but like any major transition, it also brought its share of insecurities and questions. For Michael, these doubts manifested one night as he observed Emily asleep beside him, her young face peaceful in the silver light of the Californian moon. At 45, he wondered if he wasn't depriving her of experiences she should have had. Carefree evenings with friends her age, spontaneous adventures, passionate romances of youth. By binding her to him so early in her life, wasn't he stealing those precious moments that would never return? These thoughts tormented him particularly when he noticed Emily's enthusiasm during her interactions with the young potter, who sometimes came to help her in the studio, a boy in his 20s, with tousled hair and an easy laugh, who shared her passion for ceramic arts. One afternoon, returning earlier than expected from a meeting in San Francisco, Michael stopped at the entrance to the studio, observing Emily and the young man, Ethan, he remembered, bent together over a piece, their heads so close they almost touched, laughing at a shared joke. The vision froze him in place, a painful mixture of jealousy and guilt tightening his heart. That evening, as they dined under the pergola, surrounded by the intoxicating scent of jasmine and the song of cicadas, Michael remained unusually silent. "Something's bothering you," observed Emily, placing her hand on his. It wasn't a question. Michael hesitated, then decided that honesty was the only possible path between them. "I saw you today with Ethan. You seemed connected." Emily looked at him with surprise, then understanding. "Michael, Ethan is a colleague, a technical mentor, nothing more." "I know," he replied quickly, embarrassed by his own insecurity. "It's just that you have the same age, the same interests. Sometimes I wonder if you wouldn't be happier with someone like him." Emily set down her wineglass, her expression suddenly serious. "Is that really what you think? That age is the determining factor of happiness in a relationship?" "No, of course not, but," she encouraged him, her eyes seeking his in the golden twilight light. Michael sighed deeply, finally expressing the fear that was gnawing at him. "But I wonder if one day you won't wake up realizing that you've spent your best years with a man who will be old when you're still in your prime." Emily remained silent for a long time, considering his words with the seriousness they deserved. Then she stood up, walked around the table and sat on his knees, as she would have done with a child who needed reassurance, a gesture that, in its simplicity, momentarily reversed their usual age dynamic. "Michael," she said softly, framing his face with her hands, "love is not a mathematical equation where we add up the years and subtract the differences. It's a meeting of souls, of values, of shared visions." She rested her forehead against his. "When I'm in my prime, as you say, I want to be with the man who saw me truly, who believed in me, who helped me become my best version. That man is you." These words momentarily appeased Michael's fears, but they didn't dispel them completely, because in a corner of his mind persisted this incontestable truth. One day he would age well beyond Emily, and on that day could she truly be happy to have tied her fate to his? For Emily, the doubts took a different form. As her confidence grew in her art, even receiving commissions from local galleries impressed by her innovative creations, she wondered if Michael didn't secretly regret their new life, simpler and more rustic. The long calls with New York, the increasingly frequent trips to manage crises that couldn't wait, weren't these signs that he missed his old world of adrenaline and power? One particular incident crystallized these concerns. Michael had promised to attend the opening of a collective exhibition where Emily's works were being presented for the first time. It was a small event in a modest gallery in Napa Valley, nothing comparable to the sumptuous charity galas or grand inaugurations they had attended in New York. But for Emily, it was a crucial moment, the first public validation of her work. A few hours before the event, Michael called to announce that he was detained in New York by a crucial negotiation that had been prolonged. "I'm so sorry, Emily," he said, the sincerity evident in his voice. "I'll take the first flight tomorrow morning." Emily assured him that she understood, that she wasn't disappointed. But later, standing alone in the crowded little gallery, accepting congratulations from visitors and explaining her work, she couldn't help feeling a twinge of bitterness. Wasn't this exactly what Sarah and the others had predicted? That when the time came to choose between his young wife and his business, Michael would always choose the latter. When he arrived the next day, carrying an extravagant bouquet of flowers and full of enthusiasm to see her work, Emily tried to hide her disappointment. But Michael, who had learned to read the slightest nuances of her expressions, perceived it immediately. "You're angry," he noted softly, as they stood alone in the gallery closed to the public that day. Emily shook her head, staring at one of her works, a vase with organic shapes, whose colors seemed to capture the Californian sky at twilight. Not angry, just, worried. About? She hesitated, searching for the right words. I wonder if this new life is really enough for you. The olive trees, the quiet dinners, the exhibitions in small provincial galleries. It's so far from your world before. Michael remained silent for a moment, considering his response. Then he approached one of her pieces, a bowl with earthy tones, whose irregular surface recalled the hills of Napa Valley. You see this bowl? He said, touching it delicately. It's not perfect by industrial standards. It has irregularities, small imperfections, but that's precisely what makes it unique, precious. He turned to her, his eyes reflecting a deep emotion. Our life here is like this bowl, Emily. It's not perfectly symmetrical or conforming to expectations, but it's authentic, shaped by our own hands, and for me it's infinitely more precious than all the standardized successes of my old life. These words touched Emily, momentarily appeasing her fears. But like Michael, a doubt persisted in her. What if one day he woke up regretting having exchanged the excitement of the big city for the peace of a provincial life? And if, despite all his reassurances, she wasn't enough to compensate for everything he had left behind? The fragile balance they had found was tested in an unexpected way during a weekend when Michael's mother, Victoria, showed up uninvited at the Napa Valley Ranch. Accompanied by Catherine Thompson, the candidate she had initially chosen for her son, she arrived in a gleaming Mercedes that seemed incongruous on the dirt roads leading to their home. Emily, her hands still covered in clay after a work session in the studio, observed with apprehension the two elegant women approaching the house, their high heels sinking comically into the soft garden soil. Michael isn't here, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. He's in New York for business until tomorrow. We know that perfectly well, replied Victoria with a cold smile. It's you we've come to see, my dear. Disconcerted but determined not to show her nervousness, Emily invited them in, apologizing for the simplicity of the place, the exposed beams, the rustic furniture, the absence of household staff. It's folksy, commented Victoria, examining the interior with a disdainful grimace. Exactly what I expected. Catherine, more subtle in her approach, feigned exaggerated admiration. It's so authentic, like playing at being a farmer. Fascinating as a hobby. Emily served them tea in cups she had shaped herself, observing how Victoria held hers with her fingertips, as if fearing contamination. Let's get to the point, Emily, the matriarch finally declared. You must be aware that this phase Michael is going through can't last. He is the heir to the Reed family. He has responsibilities toward his family, his name, his legacy. Michael is a 45-year-old man who makes his own decisions, Emily calmly replied, and he seems to have chosen a life that brings him joy. Victoria emitted a dry laugh. Joy? My dear child, men like Michael don't live for joy. They live for accomplishment, power, perpetuating a lineage, things you seem unable to understand or provide. Emily felt her heart tighten, but maintained an impassive face. I believe you underestimate your own son, Mrs. Reed, and perhaps you underestimate me as well. Be reasonable, Catherine gently intervened, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Emily's arm. You must see what's happening. Michael is sacrificing everything he's built. The Reed Group's stocks have fallen by 15% since he began disengaging. His associates are openly talking about restructuring. His reputation is better than ever, Emily interrupted her, her voice gaining confidence. The heritage restoration projects are celebrated across America, and more importantly, he is at peace with himself for the first time in years. Victoria leaned forward, her expression suddenly hard as steel. Listen to me well, little one. I've observed dozens of young women like you over the decades. You think you've captured the man, changed his deep nature. But the truth is that a man like Michael will always return to his essence, and his essence is not this. She made a disdainful gesture encompassing the simple house, the studio visible through the window. It's a phase, a late rebellion, a particularly pathetic midlife crisis. And when it's over, and believe me it will be, what will be left for you? These words, pronounced with glacial conviction, touched a sensitive chord in Emily, awakening her own deepest doubts. her own fears that Michael might one day regret their life together. Catherine, sensing her vulnerability, drove the point home. If you truly love him, you must think about what's best for him in the long term, not your selfish desires to keep him in this premature retirement. Emily remained silent, words failing her in the face of this coordinated attack. A part of her, the insecure part that had always doubted her place in Michael's life, wondered if these women weren't right. Was she really depriving him of the greatness that was his birthright? Was her love truly an act of disguised selfishness? It was at this precise moment that the door opened, revealing Michael on the threshold, his expression shifting from surprise to cold anger in a split second. "What does this mean?" he asked in a dangerously calm voice. Victoria rose gracefully, as if this confrontation were perfectly normal. "Michael, darling, we were having a little conversation among women, a discussion about the future, responsibilities, things that truly matter." Michael slowly entered the room, setting down his suitcase, his gaze moving from his mother to Catherine, then to Emily, whose pale face and troubled eyes revealed the nature of the conversation. "I see," he said simply. Then, turning to Emily, "Could you leave us for a moment? I need to speak with my mother and her guest in private." Emily nodded, grateful for this escape route. She left quickly, heading to her studio, her refuge from emotional turbulence. There, surrounded by her creations and the familiar smell of clay, she tried to calm the doubts that the two women had so skillfully sown. In the house, Michael confronted his mother with a controlled fury she had never seen in him. "How dare you come here to our home and attack my wife, after all she has done for me, for the company?" Victoria remained imperturbable. "Someone has to bring you back to reason, Michael. You're destroying the legacy of generations for a whim, a romantic fantasy with a girl who could be your daughter." "A whim," repeated Michael with incredulity. "You call the first authentic relationship of my life a whim? The first person who has loved me for who I am, not for what I possess or represent?" "Love?" His mother almost spat the word. "Do you really believe that a 22-year-old girl can understand what true love is? She's fascinated by your power, dazzled by your position. When these things disappear, and they are already disappearing, what will remain?" Michael looked at her for a long time, as if truly seeing his mother for the first time. Her bitterness, her coldness, her fundamental inability to understand what truly gave value to life. "I pity you, Mother," he said finally. "I pity you sincerely. Because if this is how you see love, then you have never known this feeling. Not with Father, not with your children, not with anyone." These words seemed to strike Victoria like a physical slap, making her step back. "And you, Catherine," continued Michael, turning to the other woman, "what kind of person agrees to participate in this charade, to come attack an innocent young woman in her own home? Is this really the person you want to be?" Catherine at least had the decency to appear embarrassed. I sincerely believed I was acting in your interest, Michael." "No," he firmly replied. "You were acting in your own interest and in my mother's. But never at any moment did you think about my real happiness." He headed for the door. "I suggest you leave now. And I warn both of you. If you try to interfere in our marriage again, if you try to hurt Emily in any way, it will be the last time we speak." After their departure, Michael found Emily in her studio, working furiously on a piece of clay, as if she could shape her tumultuous emotions in the docile material. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I should have anticipated she would try something like this." Emily looked up, her hands stopping. "Were they right, Michael? Am I holding you back? Depriving you of the life you should be leading?" Michael approached slowly, kneeling near her potter's wheel to be at her eye level. "Emily, look at me. Really look at me. Do I look like a man deprived of something? Or a man who has finally found what he had been seeking all his life without knowing it?" Their gazes met. He, the 45-year-old man, whose eyes had regained a clarity and peace long absent. She, the 22-year-old woman, whose face reflected a wisdom born of true love and shared trials. "I love you," she said simply, "and I'm afraid that's not enough in the face of everything the world expects from you." Michael smiled, gently touching her clay-smudged face. "It's the world that isn't enough, Emily, not our love." The following spring marked a decisive turning point in their shared life. Visitors who now crossed the threshold of the Napa Valley Ranch no longer came to judge or criticize. but to discover the unique creations that had begun to build Emily's reputation in the world of art ceramics. Her studio, once a simple space for personal creation, had gradually transformed into a vibrant place where young artisans came to learn traditional techniques that she had modernized with her contemporary sensibility. Michael had had an extension built, a luminous exhibition space, where Emily's works and those of her apprentices were presented to collectors and galleries. I would never have imagined that my passion could become this, Emily confided to Michael one evening, as they celebrated the sale of her complete collection to a prestigious New York gallery. It's as if a dream I hadn't even dared to formulate was coming to life. Michael observed her with a pride that surpassed anything he had felt for his own professional accomplishments. You have a gift, Emily, not just for creating beauty, but for inspiring others to discover their own creativity. Indeed, what had begun as a simple pottery studio was becoming a true artistic center. Local potters, painters, sculptors began to gather in this place where tradition and innovation coexisted harmoniously. Emily, with her generous and inclusive vision, had created a community where before there were only isolated artists. Michael, for his part, had found a new balance. Rather than completely abandoning the business world, he had transformed it, reorienting a significant part of the Reed Group's activities towards supporting artisans and preserving traditional know-how. He had created a foundation that purchased old, abandoned workshops across America, restored them, then made them available to young artisans who committed to perpetuating and reinventing American craft arts. "It's as if we've created our own world," he observed one day, as they walked hand in hand among the olive trees of their property. "A world that is neither completely yours nor completely mine, but something new." Emily smiled, squeezing his hand. "A world built on each person's strengths, rather than on our differences." This new harmony had allowed them to overcome the last barriers between them. Michael finally allowed himself to be vulnerable, confessing his own fears that at 45 he would never be loved for who he truly was, but only for what he possessed. "All my life," he admitted one evening, as they lay under the California stars, "I believed that my value resided in what I could acquire, build, possess." Each relationship seemed to confirm this belief. Women loved me for my fortune, men for my power or influence. Emily turned to him, her face gently illuminated by the silver moonlight. "And now?" "Now," he said softly, "I understand that true wealth is being loved for one's weaknesses as much as for one's strengths, being able to be imperfect and yet perfectly accepted." He also admitted fearing that one day she would wake up and realize she had wasted her youth with a much older man. Emily took his face in her hands and said she loved him precisely for his scars, his flaws, for the humanity he hid under his armor of power, and that these 24 years of difference didn't matter when there was so much respect and authentic love between them. "Time passes differently when one is truly alive," she murmured. "These 2 years by your side have been richer, deeper, more meaningful than an entire life spent following the path that others would have chosen for me." This new confidence allowed them to take a step they had until then avoided in their discussions, the idea of starting a family. Michael, aware of his age, had deliberately avoided the subject, fearing to deprive Emily of this experience, or worse, not to be there long enough to see their children grow up. It was Emily who brought up the subject one spring morning as they were having breakfast under the pergola covered with flowering wisteria. "I've been thinking," she began with slight nervousness, "that perhaps it would be time to talk about having a child." Michael set down his coffee cup, studying her face carefully. "Are you sure that's what you want? You're only 23, Emily. You have your whole life ahead of you. Your career is just beginning to flourish." She smiled, touched by his concern. "I'm sure it's what I want with you. And yes, I'm young, but I feel ready. Don't you?" He hesitated, then decided once more that complete honesty was the only possible path between them. "I'm afraid, Emily. Afraid of not being there long enough. When our child is 20, I'll be 66, and if you what?" she gently encouraged, taking his hand. "And if I leave you alone too soon? If you find yourself raising our child without me? If I become a burden for both of you?" Emily looked at him for a long time, her eyes filled with a deep understanding that went beyond her young age. "Michael, love always involves a risk. No one can promise to be there forever. What matters is the quality of the shared time, not its duration. She stood up, walked around the table, and sat on his knees, surrounding his neck with her arms. I would rather have 10 years of true happiness with you and our child than an entire lifetime of risk-free security and without depth. These words touched Michael to the core of his being. He realized that Emily, despite her youth, or perhaps because of it, understood something essential that he, with all his experience, had taken decades to grasp. Life is not an equation to solve or a risk to minimize, but a journey to fully embrace, with all its uncertainties and possibilities. Then, he said, his voice slightly trembling with emotion, "Let's do it. Let's create this new life together." Emily smiled, tears of joy shining in her eyes. "Together," she repeated, sealing this promise with a kiss. This decision marked the beginning of a new chapter in their story, a rebirth not only of their couple, but of their vision of the future. Michael, who had spent so many years accumulating possessions for an indefinite future, now found himself consciously building a different legacy, not of buildings and bank accounts, but of values, love, and a vision of the world he hoped to pass on to the next generation. Autumn brought subtle but profound changes. The Napa Valley Ranch, once simply their refuge, had become the center of a flourishing community. Emily's studio now hosted regular classes for village children. Local artisans came to share techniques and inspiration, and even some of Michael's New York associates began to make the journey to discover this new model of cultural enterprise they had created together. The Reed Foundation for Traditional Arts, initially conceived as a secondary project, was taking on an unexpected scope. Artisans from across America, then from Europe and Asia, submitted applications to join the network of restored workshops. Art historians were interested in this initiative that revitalized endangered know-how. Even the Ministry of Culture had made contact, wishing to explore a partnership to extend the model nationally. One October day, as the surrounding vineyards were donning purple and gold, Michael and Emily received an unexpected visit. James, the former associate who had tried to push Michael out of his own company during the crisis, showed up at the ranch, visibly uncomfortable but determined. "I haven't come for business," he said after the initial greetings, politely refusing the glass of local wine Michael offered him. "I've come to apologize." The couple exchanged a surprised look. "I was a coward," continued James, staring at his joined hands. "I abandoned a friend of 30 years at the first sign of difficulty. Worse, I conspired to take his place." He raised his eyes to Michael. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to tell you that I deeply admire what you've built here. It's inspiring." Michael, after a moment of reflection, extended his hand to his former friend. "We all make mistakes, James. What matters is having the courage to recognize them." This reconciliation, though initially fragile, marked the beginning of a new phase. James, with his financial expertise, became a valuable advisor to the foundation, helping to structure its expansion in a sustainable way. Other former associates followed, attracted no longer by the lure of profit, but by the authentic vision and deep meaning of the project. Michael's mother, Victoria, remained the only persistent shadow on this harmonious picture. Despite several reconciliation attempts initiated by Emily, cards for birthdays, invitations for holidays, the matriarch maintained an icy silence. "She's too proud," explained Michael one evening, after another letter had returned without response. Admitting she was wrong about us would be equivalent to questioning her entire worldview. Emily, seated at her potter's wheel, delicately modeling a new piece, nodded thoughtfully. "It's sad, though. Life is too short to cling to resentment like that." Michael approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have a remarkably generous heart, Emily. Even after all she put you through, you continue to reach out." Emily smiled, covering his hand with hers. "I learned long ago that resentment is too heavy a burden to carry. It prevents us from moving forward." She paused, her smile widening. "And these days, I need all my energy to move forward." This allusion made Michael laugh. Emily's pregnancy, now visible under her loose clothing, had brought a new dimension to their happiness. The idea of becoming a father at 46, which had initially terrified him, now filled him with a quiet joy and renewed determination. They had decided not to know the sex of the child, preferring to welcome this surprise as they had welcomed so many other unexpected turns in their relationship. Together, they had prepared a bright room in the east wing of the ranch, decorating it with soft colors and furniture made by local artisans. Emily had created a mural representing the California countryside through the seasons, populated with fantastic animals and mythological creatures. "Our child will grow up surrounded by beauty and authenticity," she had said, putting the finishing touch on her work. Michael, observing this 23-year-old woman who had transformed his life in ways he could never have imagined, sometimes felt an emotion so intense it became almost painful. "How did I deserve all this?" he asked one evening, as they walked in their olive grove, the setting sun bathing the century-old trees in a golden light. Emily stopped, taking his face in her hands in that gesture that had become so characteristic of their intimacy. "You didn't deserve it, Michael. No more than I did. Love is not a reward or a punishment. It's a gift, freely offered and freely received." He smiled, placing a hand on her rounded belly where their future child was growing. "You've become a philosopher now." She laughed, that clear sound that continued to melt something in him each time he heard it. "No, just a woman who has found her place in the world, beside the man she loves." These moments of deep connection were now daily, woven into the very fabric of their shared existence. They had created their own rituals, walking barefoot on the beaches of Malibu at dawn, cooking clam chowder together on Sundays in the ranch, reading poetry by Whitman and Frost aloud before sleeping. He taught her the wines he knew so well, while she reconnected him with the spontaneity and joy he had lost over the years. Each custom strengthened the bonds between two worlds and two generations that had seemed incompatible but proved to be perfectly complementary. Michael had definitely given up the frantic race for success that had defined the first half of his life. He now devoted his time and energy to projects that had deep meaning. The foundation, of course, but also local initiatives to revitalize the rural economy, educational programs to transmit traditional know-how to new generations. Emily, for her part, was flourishing in her role as artist and mentor. Her creations, combining ancestral techniques and contemporary sensibility, were beginning to be recognized well beyond California. Galleries in New York, London, even Tokyo were interested in her work, attracted by that authenticity that was becoming so rare in an increasingly commercial art world. But beyond these public successes, it was their private harmony that constituted their greatest achievement. They had found what so many people seek all their lives, a relationship where each could be fully themselves while encouraging the other to grow and flourish. "I sometimes think about what my life would be like if we had never met," Michael confided one evening, as they observed the stars from their terrace. "I would probably still be in New York, accumulating empty victories, surrounded by people who saw in me only a means to achieve their own ends." Emily leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "And I would probably have stayed in my village, dreaming of horizons I would never have dared to explore." "How strange is fate," he murmured, kissing her hair. "All these forces that must align for two people to find each other at the right moment." "Not just find each other," she gently corrected. "Recognize each other." Winter brought unexpected challenges. Emily, in her 7th month of pregnancy, began to develop complications that worried their doctor. High blood pressure, persistent pain, signs of preeclampsia, all alarm signals that transformed a period that was supposed to be joyful into a time of constant anxiety. Complete rest, Dr. Thompson, an experienced obstetrician from San Francisco, had ordered. No more work in the studio, no more classes, no more physical effort of any kind. For Emily, so active and so passionate about her work, this restriction was almost unbearable. The first days she tried to scrupulously follow the instructions, staying in bed, reading books, sketching designs for future creations. But quickly, frustration began to be felt. "I feel useless," she confided to Michael one afternoon, as he brought her a tea and checked if she needed anything. "As if I were a prisoner of my own body." Michael sat on the edge of the bed, taking her hand. "You're not useless, Emily. You're currently accomplishing the most important task, protecting our child." She smiled weakly. "I know. It's just that I feel like everything we've built is collapsing without me. The classes, the pending orders, the projects for the spring exhibition." "Nothing is collapsing," he reassured her. Ethan is managing the studio very well. The students perfectly understand the situation. And as for the exhibition, we still have months ahead of us." But despite these reassuring words, Michael himself was eaten up with worry. Emily's complications awakened deep fears in him. What if her body, younger but tested by pregnancy, could not withstand this trial? What if, in desiring to start a family, he had exposed her to a danger he hadn't anticipated? These fears materialized one January morning, as the Santa Ana winds blew with rare violence, making the ranch's shutters tremble. Michael was awakened by a cry of pain from Emily. The sheet under her was stained with blood, her pale face contracted with suffering. "The baby," she murmured, gripping his hand with desperate strength. "Michael, something's wrong with the baby." The hours that followed were a fog of anguish and frantic action. The ambulance struggling against the Santa Ana on the winding roads of California. The arrival at the San Francisco hospital, where a team of doctors was already waiting, warned by Dr. Thompson. The forced separation when Emily was taken to the operating room, leaving Michael alone in an aseptic waiting room, confronted with the possibility of losing everything that now gave meaning to his life. "It's in these moments that we realize what truly matters," said a voice beside him, making him start. Michael turned to discover, to his great surprise, his mother seated there, straight and dignified as always, but with an expression he had never seen on her, a vulnerability, an almost humanity. "Mother?" he said, incredulous. How did you know?" Victoria Reed smoothed her skirt with a nervous gesture. "I've been keeping an eye on you two. Discreetly. When I heard about the complications, I asked to be informed of any change." She hesitated, then added, "Whatever you may think of me, Michael, I don't wish harm on your wife or your child." Michael was too emotionally exhausted to maintain his anger. "Why are you here, Mother?" "Really?" Victoria seemed to struggle with herself, searching for the right words, a first for this woman usually so assured of her right to define others' reality. "Because I was wrong," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "I was wrong about her, about both of you." Michael looked at her with astonishment, unable to believe what he was hearing. "I've been observing from a distance," she continued. "What you've built together, this foundation, this community, I've seen how she has changed you. Not by diminishing you, as I feared, but by making you stronger, more authentic." She took a deep breath. "And I realized that I had spent my life pursuing values that in the end brought me only loneliness and bitterness." These words, coming from this woman who had always seemed unshakable in her convictions, touched Michael deeply. He suddenly saw his mother no longer as the intimidating matriarch who had shaped his childhood with an iron hand, but as an elderly woman, perhaps finally confronted with the emptiness of certain life choices. Before he could respond, a doctor in operating room attire appeared in the doorframe. Michael jumped to his feet, his heart beating wildly. "Mr. Reed," the doctor called. "That's me," he replied, his voice hoarse with anguish. "How are they?" The doctor approached, removing his mask, revealing a tired but smiling face. "Your son has been born. A bit prematurely, but his vital functions are good. He's small, he'll have to stay in an incubator for a while, but we're optimistic." Michael felt his knees weaken. "And Emily, my wife?" "The situation was critical for a moment," the doctor admitted. "She lost a lot of blood, but we managed to stabilize her condition. She's strong, your wife." "She is," murmured Michael, tears of relief flowing freely down his face. "My God, she truly is." Victoria stood up as well, placing a hesitant hand on her son's shoulder. "Congratulations, Michael. You're a father." He turned to her, and in a gesture that surprised both his mother and himself, he enveloped her in an embrace. "And you're a grandmother," he said softly. This moment of reconciliation, born in the very heart of the crisis, marked the beginning of a healing not only for Emily and the newborn, but also for this family long divided by pride and expectations. The following days were a mixture of joy and anxiety. Little Ethan, named in homage to the potter who had been the first to believe in Emily's talent, fought valiantly in his incubator, gaining strength each day. Emily, although physically weakened, was gradually recovering, supported by a love that now seemed indestructible. Michael divided his time between the hospital and the ranch, where members of their community had spontaneously organized to keep the studio active and prepare the house for the return of mother and child. Ethan, the potter, directed operations with surprising efficiency. Emily's students created commemorative pieces to celebrate the birth. Even James and other New York associates sent messages of support and offered their help. And in this general orchestration of solidarity, Victoria Reed played a discreet but significant role. Without seeking to impose her presence, she brought her organizational experience, mobilizing her contacts to obtain the best medical equipment, the best specialists for little Ethan's follow-up. One afternoon, while Emily, sufficiently recovered to receive extended visits, was holding her son against her chest for the first time. Without the intermediary of the incubator, Victoria timidly presented herself at the hospital room door. "May I come in?" she asked, her usual confidence replaced by an unusual humility. Emily looked up, surprised but not hostile. "Certainly, Mrs. Reed." "Victoria, please," the elderly woman gently corrected, approaching cautiously the bed, where the young mother was holding her baby. A silence charged with complex emotions settled between them, the 23-year-old woman who had nearly lost her life giving birth, and the septuagenarian who was only beginning to understand the true nature of love and family. "He's magnificent," Victoria finally said, observing the newborn with a tenderness Emily would never have believed possible in this woman. "He has your eyes, and the Reed nose." Emily smiled, touched despite herself by this moment of connection. "Would you like to hold him?" The surprise and emotion that crossed Victoria's usually composed face were almost painful to observe. You would allow me this? After all I've said, all I've done?" "Ethan is your grandson," Emily replied simply, "and life is too precious, too fragile to waste on resentments." With an almost sacred reverence, Victoria took the baby in her arms, looking at him with wonder. "Thank you," she murmured, and these simple words contained a recognition that went well beyond the immediate gesture, a recognition of the lesson in humanity that this young woman was offering her. Michael, who was observing the scene from the threshold of the door, felt his heart swell with a love that now embraced not only his wife and son, but also this new possibility of family healing. 5 years had passed since that dramatic night, when Ethan had come into the world, forever transforming the lives of those around him. The Napa Valley Ranch, once a simple refuge, was now the vibrant heart of a flourishing artistic community. Emily's studio, considerably enlarged, now welcomed artisans from across America, come to learn her unique techniques that blended Californian tradition and contemporary innovation. Her works were exhibited in prestigious museums, but she stubbornly refused to relocalize her production or industrialize her process, preferring to train a new generation of creators who would perpetuate her ethical and authentic approach. Michael, at 50, had found a serenity he would never have believed possible in his previous life. The Reed Foundation for Traditional Arts was now a model studied in business schools, proving that a company could prosper while preserving deep cultural values. He divided his time between the strategic management of his New York affairs and his family life in California, having finally found that balance that had eluded him for so long. Victoria Reed, against all expectations, had become a devoted and present grandmother, spending long months at the ranch where she had had an independent apartment furnished for herself. Her relationship with Emily, initially courteous but distant, had gradually transformed into mutual respect and then sincere affection. The young woman had taught her patience and simple joy, while the matriarch shared with her centuries of family history and traditions. Ethan was growing up in this unique environment, surrounded by artists, artisans, and visitors from around the world. At 5 years old, he already showed an artistic sensitivity inherited from his mother and an intellectual curiosity that reminded of his father. Perfectly at ease both in Manhattan salons and in the muddy studio, he embodied this harmonious synthesis that his parents had created between their worlds of origin. That day, a sweet autumn day when the golden light of California transformed each leaf, each stone into a work of art, a special celebration was taking place at the ranch. Michael and Emily were renewing their vows for their 5th wedding anniversary, surrounded by all those who had played a role in their extraordinary journey. The ceremony took place in the Olive Garden, under an arch of old roses and jasmine. Emily, now a woman of 28, whose beauty had deepened with experience and motherhood, wore a simple but elegant dress, created by a young designer from the foundation. Michael, whose graying temples added to his charm, looked at her with the same wonder as at their first meeting. Ethan, proud in his little suit, brought the rings, followed by Jessica, the former friend who had sown doubt but who, having finally found her own path, had returned to their lives with a new humility. James was there too, as well as former New York associates, local artisans, Emily's students, forming a surprisingly diverse assembly that reflected the richness of their shared life. After the exchange of vows, simple and profound, the celebration continued until late into the night. Tables had been set up in the olive grove, illuminated by hundreds of artisanal lanterns created specially for the occasion. Traditional Californian dishes stood alongside sophisticated gastronomic creations, symbolizing once more this fusion of worlds that defined their union. As the night advanced and the stars appeared in the California sky, Michael and Emily discreetly slipped away, hand in hand, for a private walk on the property. 5 years, murmured Michael, squeezing her hand as they followed a familiar path among the vineyards. Sometimes I feel like it was yesterday that I saw you for the first time, and other times it seems like we've always been together. Emily smiled, her face bathed in the silver moonlight. That's the paradox of true love, I think. It transforms us so deeply that it becomes difficult to imagine who we were before. They reached their favorite spot, a small promontory overlooking the valley, from which one could see both their illuminated ranch below and in the distance the twinkling lights of the Napa Valley villages. "Do you ever regret?" Michael suddenly asked, expressing a concern that, although less frequent, had never completely disappeared. "Tying yourself so young to a much older man?" Emily turned to him, her expression serene and confident. "Look around you, Michael. Look at what we've built together. Our home, our family, our community." She made a gesture, embracing the nocturnal landscape. "How could I regret the path that led me to all this?" He smiled, touched as always by her intuitive wisdom. "Do you know what fascinates me most after all these years?" "Tell me," she encouraged him, snuggling against him in the coolness of the autumn night. "That we continue to grow, to evolve, but always together, always in the same direction." He surrounded her shoulders with his arm. "As if, despite our so different origins, our souls had always been destined to follow the same path." Emily remained silent for a moment, contemplating the stars that seemed so close in the clear California sky. Then she said softly, "Perhaps that's the true miracle of love. Not that it finds us at the right moment, but that it transforms us until every moment becomes the right one." They remained like this for a long time, embraced under the starry sky, listening to the distant sounds of the celebration and the eternal music of the California cicadas. Two beings who, despite the difference in age and worlds, had found that rare and precious thing, a love that transcended conventions, that healed old wounds, and that created a space where each could become their best version. And like the seasons that follow one another, each bringing its challenges and its beauties, their love would continue to evolve, to deepen, to traverse winters and springs with this quiet certainty that what they had built together was stronger than all the storms, all the doubts, all the conventions that the world might oppose to them. Below, in the illuminated ranch, Ethan was dancing with his grandmother, Victoria, under the tender gaze of the guests. Jessica was helping to serve dessert, laughing with James about a shared joke. Artisans of all ages, friends come from New York and from surrounding villages, all gathered in this celebration that was much more than the anniversary of a marriage. It was the affirmation of a different vision of life, where differences in age, origin, path became not obstacles, but complementary forces. "It's time to go back," Emily finally murmured, shivering slightly in the night breeze. "Our son will wonder where we've gone." Michael nodded, but before taking the way back he stopped, looking one last time at the panorama before them, this California land that had welcomed and transformed them. "You know," he said softly, "when I was your age I believed that success was measured in numbers, acquisitions, influence. I would never have imagined that it could take this form, a family, a community, a life with true meaning." Emily smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "And I, at 21, believed that love had to be simple, evident, without complications. I would never have imagined that it could be this complex and magnificent adventure, this constant learning of each other." Hand in hand they walked back down to the ranch, toward the light and music, toward their son and their friends, toward this life they had created together against all expectations. And as they crossed the threshold of the garden, A shooting star traversed the California sky, brief, brilliant, extraordinary. Just like the love that, against probabilities and conventions, had united these two souls separated by 24 years, but bound by something much deeper and more lasting than the simple passage of time. "Look," said Emily, pointing to the sky. "A wish to make." Michael squeezed her hand, his heart overflowing with gratitude. "I no longer need wishes," he murmured. "Everything I could have desired is already here." The music enveloped them as they rejoined the celebration, Ethan running toward them with the overflowing energy of his 5 years. Michael lifted him into his arms, while Emily passed a tender hand through their son's hair. Together they formed a picture that defied conventions but embodied a simple and eternal truth. Love, when it is authentic and deep, transcends differences in age, environment, experience. It creates its own universe, its own rules, its own harmony. And in this corner of California, among the century-old olive trees and the vineyards, two beings that everything seemed to separate had proven that sometimes destiny writes stories wiser and more beautiful than those that society judges acceptable or convenient. Their love, like the Napa Valley ranch they inhabited, had taken deep root in this land, drawing its strength from the very difference that should have weakened them, transforming what seemed to be a weakness into their greatest strength. For in the end, it was not age that defined their relationship, but the depth of their connection, the authenticity of their commitment, and this rare ability to see beyond appearances, to recognize in the other a soul complementary to one's own. And as they danced under the California stars, surrounded by those they loved, Michael and Emily knew that their story would continue to be written season after season, year after year, with this quiet certainty that what they had found together was that rare and precious treasure that so many others seek all their lives. A love that not only defines their present, but illuminates their past and traces the path of their future.